Good morning, my name is Charlotte Collins and I'd like to welcome you to the Business Central and Wellington Chamber of Commerce webinar on compelling communication cuts through the clutter. I would like to introduce you to Mel Kettle, who will be running the webinar this morning. Welcome, Mel.
Thanks, Charlotte. How are you?
Very good, thanks.
And good morning to everyone who has joined us. So I was just saying to Charlotte, I'm in Brisbane in Australia, which is why I sound a little bit different to all of you. And this time yesterday morning, it's 7 a.m. here. So this time yesterday morning, there was a jackhammer outside my office window on the street looking for replacing some water pipes, which was unbelievably loud. And as soon as that stopped, the chainsaw started next door at my neighbour's house because yesterday was the first day of their renovations. Today at this same time, it's blissfully silent outside apart from a few birds. So let's hope we don't have any of the jackhammering chainsaw sounds for at least an hour. So I am talking today about creating communication and compelling communication that cuts through the clutter. A couple of housekeeping announcements. We'll run for an hour. I'll speak for about 45 minutes or 50 minutes maybe, and then we'll leave some time at the end for questions. So if you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat box and I'll come to them at the end. Also happy to be contacted after the webinar if you've got questions afterwards, that you haven't thought of as we go through. If you have any issues with sound or with audio or with video, please again let me know and just pop a comment in the chat box, and we'll try to address that, but hopefully it will all be okay. We are recording this webinar as well, so again, if all goes according to the plan, you'll be sent a copy of it tomorrow by Charlotte. So let's get going. What am I doing? I am moving through my screen, my slides. So creating compelling content and communications content that cuts through the clutter. Why is this important? Well, it's important because we are bombarded with messages everywhere at the moment, and no video. Yes, you are just looking at my slides, so you're not going to see me because it's 7 a.m. and anyway, we won't go there. So you are just going to see the slides, so hopefully that's all scrolling through. So I should also add, I've got a cough. I've had a cold for a few days, so if I do cough, I apologise. I'll try to remove the microphone so that you don't have to hear that. Great, thanks Anna. So our attention span is shorter than a goldfish, and that is partly because we are bombarded with messages every moment of every day from when we wake up until we go to bed. And that is exacerbated thanks to the very nifty little device we all have in our pockets with us all the time called our smartphone. So our brains go into overdrive every day. So it's more important than ever before that we create content that is going to resonate with the people we are creating it for. Now, when we are creating content, there's three things we need to think about to make it successful. And we're going to go through each of these over the next 45 minutes. So we really, really, really need to know who our customer is. So we need to know things like, what do they do? What do they like? How old are they? What's their gender? In some cases, we need to know where they live. We need to know what they want from your organisation and what their problems are that you are going to help solve. And then it's really important, particularly, that we know their age, because we know from demographic data into social media use in particular that the age people are is indicative of what social media platforms and channels they like. So when you know your customer and you know your problem, then you can be creating content that helps solve their problem, and you can create content that is more likely to be resonating with them. And also, by knowing your customer, you can understand where do they go to get information. So how do they like to receive information that is of relevance to whatever it is that they might be wanting or looking for? So in Australia, we have this absolutely fantastic report that comes out every year called the Yellow Social Media Report. It's Yellow they're the people who do the yellow pages and the white pages, and they interview or they survey a couple of thousand business owners and consumers every year to find out, how do you use social media? What social media platforms do you use? When do you use it? And how do you use it? And I'm happy to, I'll send the link to that report in with the notes at the end. But I don't know whether there's an equivalent in New Zealand, but I suspect that the data is quite similar between us. What I love about it is that it's not American data, it's quite relevant. And one of the things it tells us is that 97% of Australians currently use social media. And Facebook is still globally the number one social media platform. But if you're trying to target people between the ages of 18 and 29, then 81% of them use Instagram and 77% of them use Snapchat. Some other research that I've been reading recently on teenagers is that most teenagers use their three preferred social media platforms are YouTube, Instagram, and Snapchat. So if you're creating products or services that are targeting teenagers and you don't have a social media presence on YouTube, Instagram, or Snapchat, then you are missing out on so many opportunities to reach that market. So that's just one small example of why it's really critical that you know your customer exceptionally well. And then once you've identified who your customer is, what their problem set is, you can then look at what kinds of content can I create, what channels can I share it through, and then you can review, how does that work for me and my organization? What is resonating with them, and what do we need to tweak to do things a little bit differently? Sorry, there's that horrible cough. So we talked about knowing your customer or knowing your audience. So ask them who they are. And it's very easy with social media today to find out things about our customers or our audience because they tell us. So if you, I've gone really quiet. If you're having volume control, just hit the volume on your computer or your phone or whatever you're listening through, and that will hopefully bump it up. And I'll do the same on mine. So ask your customers and find out, who are they? What makes them tick? What are the common questions that they have of you or of your organization? What impacts them? So if you're in the hospitality industry, for example, what are the rules around when you can open? When do you open? What kinds of food do you have? If you're so I was speaking to some members, some association of pubs and clubs recently, and one of them said, the number one question we get asked is, what's our roast of the day? So that's very easy for them to create. And Facebook is the main social media platform that their members use because the average age is 57. So they know their customers really well. And I said to them, rather than, you get lots of questions every day with people phoning you saying, what's your roast of the day? Do a Facebook post every day that says our roast today is. And you could turn it into a game or you could turn it into a joke. And you could say, today is the 17th of October. So you could say, today we're doing roast lamb, and we have done roast lamb every Wednesday for X number of years. Or did you know that we eat this much lamb a year in New Zealand, and our club contributes because we serve this much? So make it interesting and a little bit quirky, and that will make your audience be more inclined to look, to find out from you what you're doing. The other things you need to know about your audience and your customers is, why do they choose you? Why have they come to you to buy the product or to use the service versus one of your competitors? And don't be afraid to ask people. People expect to be asked for feedback from organisations that they do business with. And a lot of customers are really disappointed when they're not asked for feedback. And did you know, asking your customers for feedback is one of the best ways that you can show them that you really value that you really value them as a customer. So people love to feel needed, and people love to be asked for favours. And if you say to them, we're doing a bit of research, or we would like to know this about you, can you help us? They will feel far more valued than if you say nothing. So just keep that in the back of your mind. The other thing that you need to know or think about with people today is that even though technology is going a bit crazy, at the end of the day, people still do business with people they know, like, and trust. And so think about, how can you be more human? And being more human often means that you need to be focusing on the quality of the people who are in your sphere and not the quantity. Now, this won't work for everybody, obviously, depending on what your organisation is. But on your social media posts, don't be so caught up in the numbers of people who like your page or who like your Instagram posts or who follow you. Focus on the quality of those people instead. And that way, you can really show your audience that you value them and have meaningful interactions with them. Now, a couple of examples. I've got a friend who has 30,000 likes on her Facebook page, but her engagement is basically in the toilet, because most of those likes come from markets and countries that have no relevance or meaning to her business. And she's a travel writer. And I said to her, how did you get so many? And she said to me, I paid a guy in the Philippines to boost my page likes. And I just thought, that's why you've got no resonance on your page on Facebook, because everybody who likes your page is either has been bought to begin with, or has been who comes from Bangladesh or the Philippines or Indonesia or somewhere that's not relevant to her market, which was Australia and New Zealand. And so compare that to someone else I know who's a marketing consultant who has about 2,000 likes on her Facebook page, and every single time she posts, she gets comments, she gets likes, and she gets shares, because she really, really knows her audience, and she drills down into making sure she provides them with content that is highly relevant to who they are and what they want from her. So just think about that. Now, the image that I've used on this slide is a guy called Charles Cameron. Charles is the chief executive of a recruitment association, and this is a great example of being more human. He has fantastic loads of activity on LinkedIn, which is where his market is because it's recruitment. And this was a picture or a little video that was taken of him doing a very daggy dance at their conference dinner recently. And you can see within a week of that being put on LinkedIn, he had almost 40,000 views of that video. Now, that is such an amazing way for him to show his human side. Now, he is exceptional at building relationships with people, as you would hope, given it's the recruitment industry. But this is just another way. Like, look at how you can be creating, and we'll talk about video a little bit more in a few minutes, but look at how you can be creating images and video that show the human side of your organization, because it's so important to remember that people do business with people. And the more you can get people to know you, like you, and trust you, then the more they're going to want to do business with you, particularly when times might be a bit difficult. A great example of this is a woman I used to follow on Twitter. And I've been very active on Twitter for about 10 years. So this was about probably, we first met on Twitter about 10 years ago. And she ran with her husband a small winery just outside of Canberra in Australia. And for those of you who haven't been to Canberra, there's not much to do there, and there's even less to do when you live an hour away from Canberra. Winters are cold, which sounds hysterical talking to you guys in New Zealand, but it's cold compared to the rest of here. But she would just be on Twitter in the evenings, and she would just talk about life running a winery. They had a cellar door and they had a great restaurant. So she talked a lot about food. She talked a lot about wine. She talked a lot about the crappy TV shows that were on every night. And she talked about her open fireplace and her cat and her family. And she just had beautiful conversations with people who shared those interests. So as a result, a couple of years later, when the GFC hit, her business actually improved, because all of these people she'd been having conversations with, a lot of them were sommeliers at restaurants, they were wine buyers, they were into food, they were travel writers. And all of these people wanted to support her as a small business owner, because they knew that it was a difficult time for small business with the GFC. And so her business had one of its best years ever in the first years of the global financial crisis. And she attributes that directly to these relationships that she built on Twitter. And when she said to a few people, "Thank you so much for your support and for continuing to choose our wines over the other, thousands of wines that you can choose from," the response was always, "I feel like we're friends because of the relationship we have on Twitter, and I want to support my friends." So, social media can be so powerful. And while she wasn't creating anything amazing in terms of content, what she was doing was sharing stories and making people feel valued and focusing on her smaller, very relevant audience. And she didn't go into this looking at it as a business development opportunity. She went into it thinking, this is a great way to entertain myself on a cold winter's night when there's nothing else to do. So don't always think about it as a business thing. Think about it as the relationship building and the friendships that you can create. So the second part of the 3 circles is looking at what kinds of content is relevant. And what kinds of content can you be creating that's going to cut through the clutter? And bear in mind, you don't need to only create, you can also curate. And I'll talk about that in a sec. But relevant content is that sweet spot between the information that you want to share and what your customer wants to know. So don't just spam people with content that you want to send. So I get so frustrated when I look at businesses using social media and they're just using it as another form of advertising. It is so much more than that. And if all you do is use social media as another advertising channel, you are losing out on so many opportunities to build really good relationships with people, because social media is two-way and gives you such an amazing opportunity to actually have conversations with customers and to find out what it is they want to know from you. So think about, when you're creating content, what are the problems or what are the issues that your customers have, and why do they come to you to solve that problem? So, and then provide content and create content that helps them solve that problem. So I was talking to, I've got a friend who's a divorce lawyer, and she said one of the biggest problems that she faces with her clients, who are predominantly female, is that they make a decision to leave their partner and they don't think about the financial ramifications. So the biggest problem that one of the biggest problems that her clients have is they make this decision to leave. They tell their spouse or their partner that they're going to leave, and usually it's the spouse or the partner who controls the finances. Particularly if they've been out of work because of having children. And so they find themselves in a very precarious financial position. So I said to her, the content you need to be creating is not anything that breaches confidentiality. It's just general information on the 10 things you need to think about if you're thinking about getting a divorce. And I said, you could do, she said, there's at least 10 things you need to think about. And I said, you could do a focus each month, could focus on one of those 10 things. And so you could write 1 or 2 blog posts on each of those 10 things. And that's almost a year's worth of content. And so think about it in that simple way. It doesn't need to be, one of the issues with content creation is that a lot of people overthink what they need to do. So have a look, go back through what you've already got, because the problem, most organizations have got so much content that's been created. They've got websites with information, they've got newsletters with loads of great information. Sometimes they've got blogs with great information. Sometimes they've done video blogs with great information. So look at what you've got and then look at it through the lens of what your customer wants to know. And look at then how can you be reusing some of what you've already got. The other thing that's important to remember with your content is that you want it to educate, to entertain, and to engage. And if your content does at least one of those 3 things, then it is far more likely to cut through the clutter of all the content that we get. One of my favourite Facebook pages is the Queensland Police. Actually, many emergency services agencies around the world do social media, Facebook and Instagram, particularly well, because they have that very clever mix of educating, entertaining, and engaging, often all in the one post. So have a think, have a look in your industry or have a look more broadly to see who do you follow on your social media channels that you follow personally and professionally, and who is it that's doing things, that's creating content that does educate, entertain, and engage. And have a look at the content that you like, comment on, and share, and think, why do I like, comment on, and share those posts over other posts? And then think about the content you're creating, and look at it before you post it, and say to yourself, if I was not creating this piece of content, would I like it, comment on it, or share it? And if the answer is no to all of those 3, then think about how can you tweak your content so it's a little bit more interesting and engaging. One of my absolute favourite posts is this one from the Australian Tax Office. Now, the Australian Tax Office would have to be one of the most boring and uninteresting places to be creating content, but this really resonated. And this had, thousands of views and shares and comments because it was cleverly planned to go up the day that Game of Thrones dropped its new season a couple of years ago. And so you can see from the comment and from the image that it, it's clever, but it also gives good information about what you need to know when you're preparing your tax returns. So have a think about how can you be, what happens in your business world that happens every year that your audience need to know about. So if you're an accountant, there's key dates every year that never change. The end of the financial year never changes. The dates that you have to submit your tax returns by never changes. There's other key dates that never change. If you work in childcare, then you've always got closures for things like school holidays and Christmas and public holidays and Easter, and that never changes. If you work in retail, there's busy times of your year and there's quiet times of your year, and they don't normally change. So just, think about what happens in my world that is always the same. One of the things I do with my clients is we sit down and we work out a content calendar for the year. So we just make it really simple. We just get a whiteboard or a piece of paper and we divide it into 12, and each of the 12 boxes represents each month of the year. And we just write down what are the things that happen every year that we know about. And it's the external events such as Christmas and Easter and school holidays and public holidays and relevant, days of the year that might relate to the organisation. So, Heart Day or Heart Week, or in October it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So if that's relevant to you, then there's opportunities there to be creating relevant content. And then we look at what happens internally within our organisation every year. What are the events that we do every year at the same time? What are the known peaks and troughs of our organisation that provides us with opportunities? And then you can look at it. It just breaks down and it helps you create content that's going to be relevant to you, but also relevant to your audience. Excuse me. So I talked a moment ago about the difference between creating and curating. One of the things that a lot of people forget is that they don't need to create every piece of content that is shared. There's a lot of social media accounts now, particularly on Instagram, that are solely curated accounts. Now, this one is for Queensland, and all of their images and videos come from people who either live or are holidaying in Queensland. If you go to their Instagram account, then you'll see in the bio that they say, if you use the hashtag "This is Queensland," then that means that you are happy for us to share your piece of content, your image or your video with attribution. Now they still go back and get permission, but it's just it's an easier way of not having to be creating all the images yourself. I was one of my other favorite Snapchat accounts a few years ago was the American National Park Service, US National Parks. They handed their Snapchat account over to a different national park every week. And so that national park was responsible for sharing stories and images and video on Snapchat for that week. And it was fantastic because you got to see all these different perspectives of all of these incredible national parks throughout the US. So other ways, if you're a franchise, you could hand your Instagram account or your Snapchat account over to a different franchisee every week or every month. So there's ways that you can do it. If you're feeling brave and if you're feeling, you could hand it over to a different customer every week. And get the customer's perspective, or you could do a takeover of your Instagram or your Snapchat account, once a month for a day by a customer to see how they use your product and use your service. So there's lots of ways you can be creating or curating content rather that isn't overly onerous or time consuming. The other really easy way of curating content is if you follow hashtags that you know are relevant to your audience, then you can just easily just share. So if you're on Twitter, it's very easy to be sharing other people's content. If you are on Facebook, if you've got it's very easy to be sharing other information that other people have created. So I've got a colleague who is she works with leaders, business leaders, and she is a subscriber to Harvard Business Review, and she just shares an article from Harvard Business Review every 2 or 3 days that she's read for her audience on LinkedIn. And that resonates with them because she's doing the thinking and she's doing the hard work for them. She knows her clients really, really well, and she knows what will be of interest to them. But she also has a theme that she works towards each month for the creating and the curation of content. So that makes it a little bit easier for her. So have a think about how you can do that. The next thing with creating content is make sure you share stories, because again, people do business with people and people love stories. So have a think about how can you be sharing stories that talk about who you are, what your organization is, what you do. Now, one of my favorite people is Gabrielle Dolan. She wrote this excellent book called Stories for Work. And in it, she says, and in her book, she talks about 9 different times you can use stories from a business perspective. And she says, storytelling makes you look funny, smart, insightful, and knowledgeable. So work out what your stories are and how they relate to your brand and the messages that you want people to have about you, and make your stories real. So you could share stories about what happens behind the scenes in your organization, or you could share the story of how your CEO came to work for you or how your company started. One of my favorite websites for storytelling is Saddleback Leather. It's an American company that make the most beautiful leather bags. And you can see on the top of the screen that this is their homepage. And it says, a hot wife, 2 fabulous kids, 14 Rwandan sons and daughters, etc., etc. You just want to know more, don't you? So look at how can you share your organization's stories with people. And then, the next thing is, I'm just going to go a bit quickly now because I've just realized we're halfway through our time and I'm not halfway through my presentation. But think about how can you be having meaningful interactions. And a meaningful interaction can be as simple as saying hello. So focus on how can you be creating conversations with people rather than always making it a sales focus, because people do business with people they know, like, and trust. And then create some content that shows gratitude. Say thank you, and recognize recognize your customers who are having milestones, and recognize your long-serving customers, but recognize your staff as well. And just there's so much research that talks about the power of saying thank you. And one of the things that saying thank you does is it reduces our blood pressure, and it makes us feel less stressed, both as somebody who is showing gratitude and somebody who is receiving it. So think about how can you incorporate some gratitude. One of my favorite examples is the Doubletree by Hilton hotel chain. They give every customer who walks in a warm chocolate chip cookie. And Jay Baer, who's an American marketing expert, did some research with Doubletree by Hilton and surveyed 5,000 people who had received the cookie and said, how many of you shared that on social media? And 34% share that on social media. Now, I think he said they give away 72,000 cookies a day. So 34% of them sharing, telling somebody that they've received this cookie, that's pretty impressive. So think about how can you be showing gratitude in a way that is going to make people want to talk to people about that. And then reach out and talk to people. Social media is about being social. So make sure when you're creating content, that you don't just that as well as creating content, that you take the time to be engaging with people and to be having conversations and to be even just saying hello. We talked earlier about how good content is entertaining, engaging, and entertaining, engaging, and educates. Mental blank there. So look at what can you teach people with your content. What can you teach people about how to use your product, or about whatever it is that they're wanting to know? So how can you be using your content to educate your audience? And then how can you use your content to be asking questions and also to be answering questions? One of the things that I will often do is I'll just put out a tweet saying, I'm preparing my blog schedule for the next month. What do you want to know? What can I help you with from a marketing perspective? So look at how can you be asking questions. And then when you see, if you follow hashtags, then you can see what questions people are asking, and you can just jump in and answer them. My friend Heather Smith is an accountant, and she has written, I think she's written 7 books on accounting and on Xero and MyOb and, accounting things small business owners need to do. And she got her first book deal because the publisher followed her on Twitter and saw how she would always answer people's accounting questions. So that gives value as well. So, show an interest and think about how else you can be providing that value. And then have an opinion. Talk about things that are of relevance and of meaning to you and to your organization, and have opinions on it. There's lots of things we can be having opinions on. Some of them are going to absolutely be more polarizing than others. But as an organization, if your organization takes a stance on something, then don't be afraid to share that. One of the biggest, and maybe it's politics, or maybe it's the environment, or maybe it's equality and gay marriage, or maybe it's something completely different. But if there's something happening in your community that is important to you and important that you're wanting to share your opinion publicly, then don't be afraid to do that if it fits in with your company values and your organizational values. And a great person to be the leader of that opinion piece is your CEO or your general manager. So try to encourage, the leaders in your organization to be using their social media channels to be able to show their opinions and to be engaging as well with their customers, with your customers. And then create evergreen content. So I'm a really big believer in that you create something once and you use it often. And evergreen content, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, it's content that doesn't date. So it might be an example of how to do something. So I mentioned before, it might be, the 10 things you need to know or you need to think about before you file for divorce. Or it might be 5 things that you need to know about if you're starting a small business. Or it might be, or it might be a frequently asked question. What's the best oil that I should cook with? Or, what's the roast of the day? Think about, maybe not what's the roast of the day, but what's the best oil to cook with? Think about creating a mix of content that is evergreen and long-lasting, as well as content that has a shorter time frame. And then with your evergreen content, think about how can you create it once and use it often. I've got a picture of some tacos there because Mark Schaefer, who's another marketing expert, talks about you want to be creating taco content. And Taco Bell, an American fast food chain, has 16 ingredients and that's it. but those 16 ingredients are used to create hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different menu items. So look at how can you be repurposing and leveraging the content that you've got. And how can you be, just because you posted it today doesn't mean it won't be relevant in 6 months or 12 months. A friend of mine who writes a very popular blog shares on his social media accounts. He'll have his new blog post for today, but he'll also repost the blog post that he posted 1 year ago on this day, 2 years ago on this day, 3 years ago on this day, and 4 years ago on this day, as long as it's still relevant today. So think about how you can be reusing, because why would we always reinvent the wheel? You just don't need to. So the third part of our of our Venn diagram, the first one was knowing your customer, the second one was the content. The third one is using the relevant channel and in the relevant way. So have a look at what communication channels do you currently use. Now, you need to be obviously going where today's audience is, but you also need to be thinking about where's tomorrow's audience. So if you're wanting to target younger generations, so if you're wanting to target teenagers, Generation Z and millennials, then you need to be looking at Snapchat, Instagram and YouTube. If your audience today is primarily people in their 60s and older, then they're going to still use email, and they might be on Facebook still, or they might be on Facebook. But have a think about this is why it's so important to know who your customer or your audience is, because the more you know them, then the more you can find out where they go to get information. And then don't just think about creating written content. Look at using other forms of content. Look at using video. Video has much, much more interaction than a written post or a written piece of content. And video now can be done using Facebook, Instagram. Thank you. You can share video on Twitter. Obviously, link it back to YouTube. Create a YouTube channel if you're going to get into video. And then some of the ways that you can leverage video is if you're doing, say, an interview or having a conversation with somebody that you're recording on video, get it transcribed and then turn it into a written article, or strip out the image side of the video and pop the audio onto a podcast episode. So there's lots of different ways that you can be using video. Facebook is really promoting video, and they are really promoting it through Facebook Watch. So Facebook Watch is kind of like Netflix, but for Facebook. And they encourage people to be creating short videos that are episodic, that tell a story over a series of videos. So think about how you can do that. How can you be Netflixing, yes, it's a word, Netflixing your content so that it creates this story arc and this momentum that people want to come back to. And then look at audio technology. How can you be creating audio content? Now, this is obviously podcasting, but it's also looking at in-home and in-office audio, such as Amazon Alexa and Google Home and Siri on our phones. More and more and more, people are turning to these devices to get information. So your ad in New Zealand for Spark TV for Generation Voice is absolutely fantastic. And if you haven't seen that ad on TV or the excellent billboards around town, then Google it or have a look on YouTube for it. So it really highlights to me that children today, they're not even going to the internet and typing in to Google. They're just asking Siri for the information or the answers to the questions that they have. And that ad to me highlights the future of audio technology and what organizations need to know. So that, seriously, I love that ad. It's one of the funniest and best things I've seen in a really long time from AdWorld. So look at how can you be incorporating audio, and then look at technologies like message bots. Um, message bots are, there's more messages passed on Facebook Messenger every month than there are on Facebook. So look at how can you be using messenger God, I can't speak, messenger and chatbots in order to communicate with your audience. And one of the ways that you can use message bots is to answer a question or solve a simple problem that people have. So think about, so for example, if you do a lot of Facebook Lives or if you do a lot of live video, then you could set up a Facebook message bot that where you say to people, leave a comment, for example, live video, and then the bot will send a message to them alerting them of every time you're about to do a Facebook Live. Or if you've got common questions that you're asked, set up a message bot that answers those questions so that it saves you time because it's automated. Deakin University is developing a campus Genie, a chatbot Genie, so that it can answer the simple questions that students have. Now, it's all automated. If you want to know more about bots, a really good place to start, one of the bot development tools that a lot of my colleagues use is called ManyChat, MANY chat. So have a look at, is that something that's relevant to your audience? And is that a way that you can save time with simple tasks? And then, go away, Jenny. Just remember that social media posts that are creative are far more likely to be consumed. They're more likely to be liked, commented on, and shared. A boring social media post is like a meal that hasn't been seasoned properly. It's kind of bland and it's kind of dull. So think about how can you be creating things a little bit more creatively. And then how can you optimize for mobile? Most people today access social media through their mobile phone. So have a look on your phone at your social media accounts and have a look to see how does that stand out on a small screen. What's my use of color? What are the fonts I use? What are the images that I use, and how do they stand out? And is there a consistency with our content in terms of color, in terms of filters, in terms of font, in terms of language? What pops on my small screen? And we need to be remembering that people spend almost 4 hours a day on their phone. So if your content isn't looking good on a small screen, you need to revisit that and work out how you can make it look better. And then you also need to be making sure you're using hashtags, particularly on Instagram. If you're active in the Instagram space and in the Twitter space, and increasingly on LinkedIn and Facebook, hashtags are growing in importance. So have a think about what are the hashtags that are the most common for your industry, and then what are some hashtags that are unique to you. So try to always create a hashtag that is unique to your organization or your event. And it could be as simple as your organization's name. So a lot of the social media posts that I create, I'll just put my name, hashtag Mel Kettle, or I wrote a book recently, so I'll put the hashtag of the book title, hashtag the social association, or and then I'll use broader hashtags like social media or marketing or women in business or female speaker, or things that are relevant to what my everyday is. So get a little suite of hashtags that you can use consistently, and you probably pick 10 or 15 that you can put on a lot of your posts or some of your posts, and then alternate through them. But make sure you're using hashtags, because hashtags are followed, and hashtags, a good hashtag strategy can really help your content get seen and be resonated. So that's about all I have for you today. I do have a couple of slides, and you'll get all these, but you can take screenshots if you want, with some resources that will help you with image creation. So I use Canva for a lot of mine. I get my images from Shutterstock, but there's lots of royalty-free image libraries you can use. There's lots of great low-cost image creation and video creation tools that you can use. And when you're creating your own video, you don't need to be overly sophisticated or expensive. Most of the video that if you're creating it just for social media, you can use your smartphone and use a lapel microphone and a little tripod. And then there's software there's heaps of free video editing software that you can use. And somebody was telling me about another one the other day called Spark. That's meant to be really good for video. So I haven't tried Spark yet, but it looks like a really cool little video software that you can just create short videos that are great for Instagram stories. So you don't need to be sophisticated with what it is that you're using to create video. You can, your phones create amazing video content these days. Does anyone have any questions? We've got about 10 minutes, so pop them in the chat box if you do. I will also just give my book a quick plug. I wrote a book called The Social Association. You can find out more information on my website if it's of interest. And if you want any more information, feel free to book in a 15-minute call, and I'm really happy to chat, no obligation. If you've got any questions about anything we've talked about that you think about later, really happy to chat. All right. Any questions? Charlotte, do you have any questions? I'm unmuting you.
Very, very informative. Thank you very much, Mel.
Thank you. Okay. I could keep talking, but I probably won't. Oh, thank you very much. Well, you've got my, I'll pop my contact details. Hold on. Whoops. Here's my contact details as well. So very happy to, if you've got any questions down the track, just flick me an email. I'm always happy to help however I can. Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you very much, Charlotte, for inviting me to do this webinar for you today. You're muted, Charlotte, by the way.
Thanks very much, Mel. Really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. And thank you everyone for who has participated in the webinar. We'll have the recording out to you. Probably it takes a little bit of time for it to do its thing in the back end. So if not later today, then tomorrow that recording should come out to you all. Okay, if there's nothing else, we might finish up. Is that all right with you, Charlotte?
Yes, that sounds great.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye.
I'm just thinking.